Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, September 12th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Ohio, J.D. Vance, Tim Ryan, and a race that is expected to be surprisingly competitive this November midterm election. Now, the state of Ohio is a state that President Trump won in both 2016 and 2020 by a margin of about 8 points. This last Senate election in 2016, with incumbent Republican Senator Rob Portman in that race, he won by 21 points statewide against a former Democratic governor. In 2010, Rob Portman won by 18 points, and for a very long period of time, this Senate seat had long been a Republican stronghold. Now, it is expected still to go to the GOP these midterm elections, especially considering its history voting for Trump, voting for Republicans in 2018 as well, and also, of course, in 2020. But there is something to be said about new data out of the state from Suffolk University and the Cincinnati Enquirer that shows that Tim Ryan, the Democrat, is leading by 1 point statewide. Now, the average here shows J.D. Vance, the Republican nominee for Senate, up by 2.3% on average. Again, everyone expects J.D. Vance to win. But there is still a competitive tone to this race that simply wasn't present a year ago, and never should have been present, especially considering the partisanship of this state. To look back at the last presidential election and see that President Biden lost this state by a whopping 8 points nationwide. When you look at the shift between the past election, 2016 and 2020, the state of Ohio only shifted by 0.1%. In fact, it was one of the states that moved the least during the entire election cycle. States such as Michigan moved by 3 points, Pennsylvania by 2, Wisconsin by a point, Georgia by 5 points, Texas by 3, Arizona by 4, Colorado by 9. But the state of Ohio, 0.1%. Again, one of the narrowest shifts we have seen between 2016 and 2020 because President Trump did so well in that state, flipping an Obama state in 2016, locking it down in 2020. Democrats thought it was in play, but it wasn't. But the reason why I think that this race could be slightly different, and I still, per my own expectations, have J.D. Vance winning this race. I do think that what we have seen pretty consistently is that this race is surprisingly more competitive than anyone could have expected. It's not just the Suffolk University poll that's showing a competitive race, it's also the Trafalgar Group, which is known for their Midwestern polls that are typically very accurate ahead of the election. Well, right now they have J.D. Vance up by just 5 points. If J.D. Vance is underperforming President Trump in a year significantly better for Republicans, that means that in a more neutral type of environment or a year such as 2018, Tim Ryan would be easily taking it away in the Senate race. The only problem here for Tim Ryan is that he's running in such an unfortunate year that it makes it very difficult for him to see how he comes out for victory. But looking at the data that has been released in the state of Ohio, again, it isn't just this recent poll. The average, actually, according to FiveThirtyEight, has Tim Ryan up by about 2 points statewide. That's substantial for a Democrat in such a competitive state, but that honestly swings super far to the right compared to the rest of the nation. Democrats have really only been able to win in Ohio in extremely beneficial years, such as 2018, when they won with Sherrod Brown as the Democratic incumbent by just 6 points. 2022 is far from a 2018 type of environment, so the fact that Ohio is even in play is a testament to itself. And the reason why I'm showing you these polls is because I want you to see that practically every single poll has had Tim Ryan ahead. Now, I don't buy it. I don't think Tim Ryan is leading right now, and I don't think it's fair to say that just because the 538 average has it as such, that this is set in stone. As I have said in my prediction videos and also many, many times in this video and outside of it, J.D. Vance is still on track for victory. But his race has narrowed up, and that is something that we really need to understand. And also you can see it to be true when it comes down to the same polls that are asking a question on both the Senate race and the governor's race. The Senate race right now is still competitive according to even the 538 forecast. I don't doubt that Tim Ryan has about a 1 in 3 chance at victory or a 1 in 4 chance at victory in the Ohio Senate race. But it's the governor's race that really goes to a landslide for the GOP, where you have Mike DeWine, the incumbent Republican governor, with a 98% chance of victory. There is a super significant drop-off between Mike DeWine's numbers and J.D. Vance's numbers, and that's largely because Mike DeWine is A, more popular, and B, knows how to run an effective campaign. Mike DeWine didn't win in 2018 simply because of the fact that he was a Republican. No, it was because he ran an effective campaign. Quite frankly, the Senate race went in an opposite direction, and you saw a 9-point difference between the governor's race and the Senate race. That only happens when you have a good Republican, especially given the national environment of that year. In 2022, Mike DeWine just had to be an okay Republican to win re-election. But not only is he, quote-unquote, an okay Republican, but in fact, he's popular. He's winning in areas that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be winning for the GOP, and is doing significantly better than his 2018 election performance. And looking at the results here, the expectations haven't changed, and the margin of victory is expected to be somewhere around 15 points for Mike DeWine, potentially in upwards of 20 points. You can find that on the Suffolk University poll that actually showed Tim Ryan ahead by 1 point. Yes, that is correct. They asked the question of both governor and Senate race, but in the governor's race, Mike DeWine gets 54% of the vote. Nan Whaley, the Democrat, gets just 39%. That is a 15-point difference between the Republican and the Democrat, but yet in the same exact group. Amongst the same voters that want to re-elect Mike DeWine by 15 points, Tim Ryan is getting 47% of the vote, actually, to J.D. Vance's 46%. This race is undeniably competitive. No matter what type of way you try to cut it, two things cannot be true: that you are seeing J.D. Vance in a non-competitive race and Mike DeWine win by such an overwhelming margin, because all of the data that tells us that would reaffirm this expectation that Mike DeWine has an overwhelming advantage also shows J.D. Vance in a very competitive race. I mean, you can see it to be true not only in Suffolk University. If you look at Trafalgar, if you look at Emerson, they ask the same questions that Suffolk University did as well. And when they ask those questions, you find a super significant drop-off. Let's go ahead and take a look, actually. I wasn't going to get too deep into it, but I want you to see. Trafalgar has Mike DeWine up by 16 points. Emerson College has Mike DeWine up 16 points. The poll from May of 2022, Columbus Dispatch and Suffolk University shows Mike DeWine up by 15 points. I mean, these are substantial victories, an average of a 16-point lead, but amongst the same group, amongst the same type of polling firm, you find that the lead for J.D. Vance either narrows or ends up going over to the Democrats being in the lead, such as the case with Cincinnati Enquirer and Suffolk University. These polls are telling us there is a tide shift in the state of Ohio, one that had never been expected. But I can't say it's not easily explainable. For one, Tim Ryan is significantly outpacing J.D. Vance when it comes down to fundraising numbers, significantly outpacing him when it comes down to turnout numbers. I mean, what you are seeing is that Tim Ryan has put together such an effective campaign that he has the possibility of winning in such a bad year for the Democratic Party. Again, if this was 2018 or quite frankly 2020, I would say Tim Ryan is the favorite. That's just how this is right now. J.D. Vance, I think, looks at this race as if it's an automatic pickup opportunity, or not pickup opportunity, an automatic hold for the GOP, no matter what he does. And on the most case, I would say that's right, at least to the extent that he could probably run an extremely poor campaign and still, maybe at most, lose by a point or two. J.D. Vance is undeniably the favorite, but I also think that we should definitely recognize that there is something more at work here. Ohio could be a sleeper race this November. These fundraising numbers are also not just ones that I'm here to show you the difference, but also to show you what is happening on the national level for Republicans. Because following Tim Ryan's over performance when it comes down to fundraising and connection with voters, the Republicans are becoming scared. Again, this is a race that Republicans won in 2016 and had a 99% chance of victory on Election Day, according to FiveThirtyEight. 99%. They won by 20 points statewide. And 6 years later, that margin and expectation drops down to just 76%. On top of that, what you find is that Republicans are getting terrified. This is not a race at any point in time they should have thought was going to be competitive. Republicans started out with a 90% chance at winning this race. 90%. To go from 92% to a point where Republicans are now funneling $28 million into a race that was never meant to be competitive means that they are afraid. Mitch McConnell and the Republican Party would not even be coming close to touching this race with a dollar if they did not need to, because Ohio should have never been in play. Mitch McConnell pumped $28 million in Ohio, largely because Tim Ryan had such a large cash advantage over J.D. Vance. Such a large cash advantage, and this was after the second quarter in the state of Ohio. We have yet to see third quarter numbers, which we will get out, quite frankly, soon. But this lead in terms of the fundraising numbers is what inspired Mitch McConnell to pump $28 million into the state of Ohio, but that $28 million doesn't just come out of nowhere. You see, the competitive race in Ohio has implications that benefit Democrats well beyond the state, because in order to get this $28 million, the GOP, the super PAC that Mitch McConnell runs and advises on, had to cancel ad buys in Alaska and Arizona. Alaska doesn't really matter. It's going to go to a Republican regardless, Kelly Tshibaka or Lisa Murkowski, that is the question. But in Arizona, it is by no means set in stone. The Republicans could very well lose in the state of Arizona and, quite frankly, are the underdogs within the race right now. So for the GOP super PAC to cancel ad buys in Arizona, not to mention Mitch McConnell and Peter Thiel's argument about who's going to fund this race, it calls into question, are Republicans giving up Arizona at the expense of Ohio? Or are they giving up Arizona and other states at the expense of Ohio when it comes down to allocation of funds and resources? The fact is, these polls are benefiting Democrats. Even if it means that they lose the election despite the polls showing the Democrats ahead, Ohio was never the target. Ohio has never been the target for national Democrats. Their main purpose for 2022 was playing defense. I constantly have to remind myself that we are in a national environment so beneficial for the GOP in terms of party seat representation, Democrats having the narrowest majority we've seen in the House of Representatives in the 21st century. We've seen the narrowest Senate majority possible in United States politics, and yet Democrats are still favored in the Senate and have a very good shot at the House, whereas previously there was no chance in hell they got close. And now a state such as Ohio, a state that the Democratic Party, again, was never even seeing on their radar. Their entire purpose was playing defense because of how slim their majorities were. Now that it's on the radar means the GOP also needs to fight back. And they're doing so with large sums of money, but those same large sums of money truly aren't going to do that much for them if they don't use it effectively, and isn't going to do much for them if they are spending it into a state that might not necessarily need it as much as another one. But the GOP is free to do with their money what they want, because at the end of the day, they are probably going to get more in the final 2 months of the campaign season. But at some point in time, it calls into question, are you too late? Right? So looking at states outside of the state of Arizona, I think this will, the state of Ohio, I think this will also be important for context here. For instance, the state that they canceled ad buys in, Mark Kelly is ahead by 6 points. Maybe this is why they canceled ad buys, thinking that Arizona won't be this super competitive state and that Ohio, having Tim Ryan ahead by 2 points, is more competitive. I also think that what we can read from these fundraising allocations and shifts is that maybe there is some internal data that the Republican Party is not releasing. Quite frankly, you typically would not release data that shows you losing in a state that you otherwise would be winning in, or a district, or whatever type of race that it is, because it doesn't make your party look good, and at best, all it does is make people more worried about the race. But I think we can read the tea leaves on this front. I think that we can see what McConnell is doing, what national Republicans are doing, the reallocation of funding, to realize that Ohio is definitely seen by the GOP as a viable pickup opportunity for the Democratic Party. So many Republican spokespersons and commentators and whatever it might be have been so confident that Ohio is certainly not in play. But obviously, Mitch McConnell thinks it is. Obviously, the polls think it is. Obviously, everybody thinks it is. The only people saying that it is not competitive, at least to some extent, are those who are hyper-partisan in favor of the GOP. Because even the Republican Party's most favorite pollster, Trafalgar, is showing the Republicans ahead by just 5 points. So I think our takeaway from this is that the state of Ohio narrowing up, becoming this more hyper-competitive state, means that Democrats are doing something right, Republicans are doing something wrong, and that there will be severe implications for the GOP, not only in Ohio, but also on the national level. As more and more data comes out of the state, we will get a better picture, but I honestly do trust this poll. Do I think that Tim Ryan is ahead? No. But what I do think is that the poll does have very accurate numbers, and it could be off by a few points, and I think as of right now, we hold the election today, J.D. Vance wins by 3. A month ago, I would have said by 8. 6 months ago, I would have said by 10. The lead for the GOP has been dwindling, and at this current trajectory, it is not out of the question, though it is unlikely, but it is not out of the question that Ohio becomes within a few points, if not a point, by November in terms of the actual margin. Ohio truly could be one of the more competitive races this election cycle, despite it never even being expected to be at all touched by the Democratic Party. In fundraising efforts, team resource efforts, whatever it might be, no one thought that this was going to happen. And yet Democrats are reaping the rewards of such an inability on the Republican side to fight back in a state that they won so solidly in the past 2 presidential elections. So as we move forward, as we continue on not covering the state of Ohio potentially for maybe a few more weeks, I think we wait for more data to come out of the state. I still stand by my prediction that J.D. Vance wins this state, but I do think that there is a good possibility that we start to see more data that changes my opinion on this topic. I am not set in stone in any way about any one political race or so vehement about one way or the other. I think both of these arguments that Tim Ryan or JD Vance have a shot at victory are valid. Right now, I would say JD Vance is the favorite, but I will say that in the future, that very well could change, but it comes down to the data that comes out of the state and what we actually see in comparison between the governorship and the Senate race. Because if a poll says the governor's race is competitive, I'm throwing it out. I don't buy it. But the Senate race, on the other hand, makes sense. Makes sense to the extent, at least, in which there's a few points between the two. Some polls have shown JD Vance losing by 9 points, 11 points. I don't buy that at all, but I do think that we're heading into a very close, low, single-digit competitive race, and the polls will continue to indicate that as we head into November. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.